Okay, so welcome everyone to tonight's webinar, Mindfulness-Based Recovery Coaching, Overcoming Attachments and Recovering Wellbeing, a conversation with Michele Happe. My name is Zoe Kessler and I'll be your host this evening on behalf of PsychCentral.com. Before we introduce tonight's presenter, I'd just like to remind you that you will be able to access the complete webinar online at Psych Central's YouTube channel later this week. If you haven't already checked it out, Psych Central has videos and webinars on a wide variety of mental health topics with guest speakers from many disciplines, so I do encourage you to have a look. So during tonight's webinar, please feel free to ask questions by typing them into the question area on your control panel. We will try to answer everyone's questions, but we'll also do our best to wrap up the session within an hour. So, Michele, I'll talk a little bit about Michele first, and I guess what I might also do is ask if anyone is having trouble hearing the webinar to raise your hand, and I'll have a little check to make sure everybody's okay. And it looks like we're all good. That's great. And thank you again for joining us. So about tonight's presenter, Michele Happe graduated from California State University with a master's in psychology. Licensed and drug and alcohol counselor in 1981, Michele began working with addicts and codependents. And she also directed one of the first eating disorder units in the United States. Since 2014, Michele has focused on coaching, specializing in recovery coaching, mindfulness coaching, and health coaching. She supports open-minded individuals in their pursuit of happiness. She's an empathetic and a challenging guide, helping people towards their authenticity. And her ultimate goal is to help you achieve physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And I'm sure she'll be able to sort of round out that description because I would like to welcome her now. Hi, Michele.
Hey, Zoe. So glad to be here.
I am so thrilled that you were able to join us. This is a really interesting topic to me, especially since I actually have been a Buddhist practitioner for many years. And I guess that sort of begs the question, just to clarify, your clients don't have to be Buddhists to be your
Not
clients,
at
right?
all.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
I like working with all kinds of people, and I always ask, well, actually, with my information that's on the internet, most people see that I'm a Buddhist, and I would say 80% of the people who contact me are not necessarily Buddhist, but they're very interested in these principles. So that's one of the things that they're attracted to.
Great. And I know we'll get into sort of what specific principles it is that you incorporate into your practice in a minute and how they actually apply. So, and we're talking about recovery coaching, and I guess maybe we should clarify, how is that different from, say, an ADHD coach or a life coach? What is a recovery coach?
Well, I've spent my whole working career working in the recovery field with addicts, alcoholics, food, quote unquote, addiction, codependency. And then on top of that, I think we're all recovering just from life. So, but my emphasis has really, and what I know best is the whole addiction, codependency dyad.
Okay. Now, I kind of heard a little something in your voice when you used the word addiction the first time. Maybe you could tell us what the word addiction means to you.
Well, I understand for myself, because I am in recovery myself, what addiction is like. They say it's an obsession of the mind coupled with an allergy of the body, and I certainly can relate to that in terms of my own relationship with drugs and alcohol and also food. But when I became a Buddhist, I started thinking about um, how attachment really fits into this concept of addiction. And there's been controversy over the years about is this an addiction per se? Is it a volitional disease? And there's still a lot of controversy about that. But when you look at the concept as one of attachment, there's not a whole lot of controversy attached to that. It just makes
Okay. Maybe actually I just sent an invitation because I know you have some nice visual images over there. Maybe you
show my
could,
screen.
yeah, maybe we could look at some of your beautiful images that you had prepared for us.
Okay, I just
Yeah,
clicked.
super. Yeah, I can see mindfulness-based recovery coaching with some really relaxing images of water and so on. So, um, okay, so we talked about mindfulness-based recovery coaching in the title, and so what would the mindfulness piece be about?
Well, mindfulness is so important to have in terms of looking at any problem that we have.
Mhm.
When we're inside of a problem,
Like that image that you have that says mindfulness is awareness. It's like that drop. Maybe we could see
and
that drop going into the water. So,
there we go.
yeah,
Thank you
thanks.
for the
So
prompting.
inside, yeah.
So when we have a problem, we're often inside of it, and it takes control of us, and we have what we call powerlessness over it, and we become it. And what Buddhism has taught me is that it's important to have a very sort of minor sense of objectivity about our problem as being something that's happening to us at this time rather than who we are. And I always say you have to kind of get just a touch outside of yourself to be able to observe yourself, to sort of become the observer of what's happening. And that makes it so much easier to deal with whatever issue we're
Hmm.
dealing with. So
What
it's
did
that
you,
sort
I
of
think I heard you say a minor sense of awareness, a minor sense.
of objectivity. Yeah, you don't want to become totally detached from yourself. You still want to
Mhm.
be connected to yourself. So I always think of
Right.
it as just being a few inches away from your own consciousness rather
Ah,
than being totally disconnected from it, because that would be like a near enemy. It wouldn't be helpful to just become dissociated. And
right.
that's
That's,
often what happens with
yeah.
people.
Huh. And that's another whole problem in and of itself.
That's right. And
So
it's
it's like a balance, I guess, between being aware of yourself and, sort of being
yes.
within and without, and keeping that sort of, I don't know,
It's it's
flow. Is that right?
it's a relationship. We have
Uh-huh.
a relationship with our issues rather
Mhm.
than being them or trying to push them away. We have to work with all of them, no matter how noxious or stinky they are. We just have to work with them. So everything
Mhm.
is relational, and I learned that from Buddhism. That the basic tenet of interdependence, that everything is connected. I only wish everyone realized this, because I think it would make the world so much of a better place to understand that any harm that we cause, we're causing to ourselves as well, because there is no separation, there really is no duality as we think of it, and that basically we're all delusional in the Buddhist sense, not in the psychological sense, because I think they are different. But our thinking is a function of our ego, and it's usually off.
Okay, there were a whole bunch of concepts in there, and I
Uh-huh.
wanted to ask a question going back to sort of the first one, because a whole bunch of concepts just flew by. Okay, the idea that everything is connected. So would that be one of the principles that you do bring to this type of coaching, recovery coaching? And if so, how does that help you with your recovery, having that sense? I just want to sort of talk about that piece about everything being connected, the interconnectivity.
Interdependence, yeah.
Okay.
It's I think one of the biggest problems we have is a sense of alienation and feeling
Mm,
like we're the only ones and feeling very
mm,
separate. And if we can understand the very important concept of interdependence, which the Dalai Lama talks about all the time. I was just listening to a show on NPR today about nature and how interdependent nature is, and understanding that, I think, gives us a sense of gentleness with ourselves
mhm.
ultimately.
Right. And talking, I guess this isn't really Buddhist, but talking about nature, I love the concept of biodiversity, which to me
Mhm.
means sort of we honor our differences. And so, that is sort of a connected principle, I think, isn't it, to interdependence?
Sure. And our
Yeah.
differences all make up this whole, I think of the whole universe as a being, that, and all of our different, it's like our hair is different than our toenails or our feet, and those are all very, very different, but it's all connected in our body and works together.
Mhm.
So that's
And
how I sort of think of it.
right. And so, again, getting back to sort of recovery coaching, then, so because we feel alienated, then bearing in mind that there is interdependence, that I guess in recovery we tend to devalue ourselves, and sometimes we get so self-critical. But when we think that, yeah, we bring some good worth to bear to the world, that people do need us as we need others, is that we have
Sure.
value, to remind ourselves that we do have intrinsic value, even though we may feel worthless at the time. Is that?
Yes, and it absolutely, and it's different than self-esteem because
Mhm.
that, you can get into the realm of narcissism. It's
Mm.
more, it's more to quote an old hippie poster, God don't make no junk.
Mhm.
So, it's more that if we are here, and this is one of the principles that I really like to focus on,
Mhm.
if we're born as human, we have the most amazing karma because the human realm gives us the ability to not only understand, but to have developed wisdom and compassion, ultimately with the goal of enlightenment, which is that state of being fully awake. And so if we are denigrating ourselves, we're not being aware of how precious human life is. And this is one of the thoughts of the four thoughts that turn the mind that I like to focus on so
The
much.
four thoughts that turn the mind, what is that?
Yes, the four thoughts that turn the mind are the first one I just said, which is precious human birth. The second one is karma. I'll just list them and then we can talk
Right.
about them if you want.
Mhm.
The third one is impermanence,
Mhm.
and the fourth one is suffering. So when I decided that I really wanted to become Buddhist, my tradition is Tibetan. Um, there's a practice called the Nundro, which is the preliminary practice, excuse me. And much of that practice is contemplating the four thoughts that turn the mind. And
Mhm.
once you become comfortable with all four of those concepts, you will begin to realize a sense of happiness and sort of settling in and feeling okay with the way things are.
Mhm.
That's the
Okay.
whole purpose.
Okay, and so how specifically then, I think we should probably explain to people very briefly what
Sure.
karma is. Like, I understand the first one. I tend to think of the first one as intrinsic worth as a human, and I can see how that
Mm-hmm.
would help in recovery coaching, like to be
Mm-hmm.
able to remember that you have this intrinsic worth. And then karma, how would you define that, and how does that apply to my recovery? And we'll talk a little bit later about what kinds of recovery, but just
Sure.
recovery in general to any kind of addiction or relationship or whatever.
Sure.
Okay.
So karma is nothing other than cause and effect. It's not, us Christians, and I grew up in with a Christian culture.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to think of karma more as punishment, that karma is going to get you, but that's really
Right.
not what karma is. It will get you if you put out bad stuff. You will experience bad stuff because of cause and effect. So because of cause and effect, it's telling us that what we put out is what we will experience. And so if we are kind to not just others, but self as well.
Mm.
We cannot just be kind to others. It's just as important to be kind and compassionate towards self, which actually builds that sense of intrinsic worth that you were talking about.
Okay.
Does that
Great.
make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
Good.
so I can see again how that would really assist in a health. I mean, we're talking about getting back to health, getting back to balance, getting back
Hmm.
to, so I can see how that would help in addressing a recovery
Right. And
situation.
when you're looking at karma, let's say as an addict, it is your karmic consequence that you have become an addict. And one of the things I first learned, and we're going to slip into another principle here, is that so with addiction comes lots and lots of suffering, obviously, right?
Right.
And one of the things I learned early on going to hear different lamas speak about Buddhism is that suffering, when done with the proper motivation, can actually purify karma. In other words, it sort of like burns off bad karma. So, and I remember when I heard that, I thought, oh my gosh, all this suffering that I've done, there can be a purpose, a useful purpose for it. And so,
Mm.
a lot of people come to me who are just lost and exhausted and confused. And so I talk a lot about suffering and how with the proper motivation, when we suffer, if we can say, okay, well, suffering is part of the deal. If you're in the human realm, you will have suffering. And a lot of
Mhm.
people mistakenly think that the Buddhists say that life is suffering, but they forget the other parts of those principles, which is that there is also cessation of suffering and there is joy. And because of impermanence, suffering comes, suffering goes.
Mhm.
So when the suffering comes and we don't become attached or identified with it, we can sort of like open up and understand, okay, well, I'm purifying some karma right now, and it will be better. It will get better eventually, rather than thinking that this, we learn in 12-step programs that all conditions are temporary.
Mhm.
And that's the same thing as impermanence. There's so many parallel
Oh, for
teachings.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's amazing.
I think that also comes back to the mindfulness. If you're mindful, then and you've lived long enough, you realize really when you think about the worst possible suffering you've ever been through, even that didn't last. That
Right.
none of our mood or our emotional, psychological states can last by their definition. Life and our moods and our states are dynamic, not static. And in that, I think there lies a lot of hope. But we have to be
Absolutely.
mindful of it because I think one of the worst feelings is feeling stuck, right? I mean, that's when
Yep.
life truly is hell. You
Well,
can't see
and
how you're going to get out of it, and it's just despairing.
yes, the ego's natural tendency is to think that this is a state that is going to last forever. But
Mm,
when we know that impermanence is sort of law, and it
mm, mm,
absolutely is law,
mhm,
then it becomes easier to sort of be open and aware, which allows us to literally embrace our suffering and send lots of compassion to it, which transforms it. And Buddhism, I look at Buddhism really as a technology, amazing technology, and
Mm-hmm.
it's all about transformation. It's all about understanding the way the universe works and then plugging into that understanding and using it as really a technology for developing well-being and happiness and joy.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I realize that, people who do study Buddhism, and I've practiced it and studied it, technology is a really good word for it. I mean, this is a system that's
System.
thousands of years old and it
Yeah.
works. It's sort of like, acupuncture. Its efficacy has been proven for time immemorial. Michelle, I
It's
wanted to, sorry?
just one quick point. It's really interesting. If you look at the Tibetan culture before Buddhism came,
Hmm.
they were a wild and crazy bunch. They lived in the very high elevations. They were extremely tough and warlike, and they had conquered the Huns to the north. Many, many thousands of years of conquering and then being conquered. And then Guru Rinpoche comes into Tibet and starts teaching these principles, and within like 100 years, he was able to sort of tame this whole wild culture, and it's just an amazing thing.
That's incredible. 100 years. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
that also gives hope for, I trying to keep to the topic of recovery, and that's a big change in a relatively
Hmm.
short period of time.
Hmm.
So that begs the question, would applying, well, obviously you must think this, but applying Buddhist principles, would you say that that will help? I don't like to say speed up. It's not like it's a race.
Augment.
Yeah, can I move through my recovery stages in a more, how do I say this? You know what I'm getting at.
Yes, it's more seamless. It's more gentle.
Hmm.
Um, it isn't that it's quicker. Like oftentimes, I'll work with people as a recovery coach who are actually actively drinking in their addiction or attachment, and I will tell them, you have to go through this. I don't have a requirement that you have to be sober.
Hmm.
It helps when you come to the session that you're sober.
Hmm.
But I've worked with many people who continue to drink and experiment with their drinking or using for maybe 2 years and then finally come to an awareness. And I hold the possibility for them, and I let them know I feel very confident that it will happen.
Wow.
Um, Many of them, after a period of time, end up getting sober, and by that time, they've got a head full of what I've been doing my best to teach. And I do need to say here, I am in no way a lama. I am not a Buddhist teacher. I'm
A
just
lama
using,
being a religious figurehead in
yes,
Buddhism, not a nice fuzzy animal.
not the animal, right?
Okay, good.
Um,
Because I don't want
no,
any
and
spin, really.
I've gotten permission from a number of lamas to teach
Mm,
these basic principles.
great.
Um, yeah,
Michelle, I want to go back. I know we're going backwards a bit, but I
no
think
problem.
there may be some who heard this who may have the same reaction, and I know you're going to understand the question, and I'm sure you've heard it many times. Earlier in our talk, you had mentioned it's your karma to be an addict. I I understand the Buddhist concept of karma. But when
Hmm.
someone hears it's your karma to be an addict, if you don't believe in reincarnation and so on and so forth, how do you keep that from sounding like a blame thing? It's a blaming thing. Can we explain to those who are with us
Sure,
tonight how that's not blaming the addict to say it's your karma to
sure.
be an addict? Great. Thank you so
Well,
much. I just want to clarify that.
sure. Yeah, it's simply you are an addict. This is what is happening to you right now, and that is not, it isn't at all a punishment thing. It really is, it provides you with curriculum for learning. So addiction is
Ah.
your particular
Hmm.
means by which you come to a closer relationship to enlightenment or being awake. So it's just
Hmm.
curriculum.
Okay.
Does this
And
make sense?
that's beautiful. I really like that. I'm going to have to try and remember that or listen to this again. So,
All of our conditions, you hear in Buddhism a lot about causes and conditions, causes and conditions.
mhm,
All of our conditions are our curriculum. So like
mm,
say you have ADD, well that's your curriculum for learning some specifically wonderful things in life that
mhm,
you wouldn't have learned if you didn't have that as an issue.
mhm. And I love how this concept turns blame on its head. It turns it more into, from my perspective, into acceptance, as you say, of what is, rather than who do you blame for being an addict? Well, my mother made me an addict, my crazy grandfather, it's more,
Hmm.
no, 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 this is your path, regardless
Yes.
of what's going on around you. So look at it as your path, and I like the word curriculum. That all is, as you say, more gentle and I think more helpful way to approach it, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and it's what I, as a guide
Hmm.
for, as a mentor, that's what I look at. I'm seeing what the person's issues are, and then I become aware of how to treat the issues in terms of extracting the curriculum out of them.
Okay, I like that a lot. Maybe we can go on to the next image, Michelle, and talk about how maybe you could address how being comfortable with oneself comes into play in terms of your work with people in recovery.
Sure. So when you begin, and again, in order to understand karma, you do not have to believe in reincarnation. It is not at all a requirement, although I certainly do, and it makes me happy to think of it that way, and I don't even care whether it's proven or not. It just works for me.
Hmm.
But I would never presume that other people have to think the way I think, because like the Buddha said, there's many paths to the top of the mountain. But when you understand that karma and suffering in particular, are a part of our lives, that we don't need to have aversion to them or to become attached to what feels good in a temporal sort of way, then we can begin to be a little bit more comfortable with ourselves. And that's really where meditation comes in, is that when you sit with yourself, with your own thoughts, and in my particular case, I've got one of these very, very busy minds, so my meditation sessions are often very hilarious because I'm making meatloaf and planning my next painting, and then I'm like becoming aware that I'm totally off on a tangent, bring myself back to my breath. And meditation really is, and my husband taught me this, like a slalom. You think of a slalom ski
Hmm.
coming down the slope, that in the center is the meditative state, but where we are is constantly veering away from it and reminding ourselves, coming back, hitting it, then again veering away, reminding ourselves. And that is what meditation is. It is not some perfect state of equanimity that is easy to achieve. It's not for me because my mind never stops working.
Yeah, tell me about it. You're talking
Right,
little Miss
right.
ADHD, right?
Totally. And
Yeah.
symptom of ADHD is high IQ, so there you go.
Doesn't always come across that way, but yeah. Um, okay, so uh, I guess the next thing then that we move to is talking about specifically, what is attachment and what sorts of things are we talking about when we talk about recovery? And I think your next image sort of addresses this, and maybe we can specifically refer to some of these things: the food, the
Sure.
substance, attachment
Right.
to relationships. Like,
Right.
so with the food piece, so how would you address food issues with a
Well,
Buddhist concept?
yes, through mindfulness and, I think with all attachments in food in particular, I don't know if you have any food issues, but I think most of us do. All of us binge on certain dates like November 25th and Christmas and, every holiday that can possibly be thought up is a binge time,
Are you
right?
saying that's an issue? Sorry. Really?
The other thing about food is it is food that gives us ultimately comfort. That state of being hungry
Mm,
is a very uncomfortable state, and so you put food in there and you immediately feel better. You gain more equanimity. So it's natural to feel that with food, but some of us who are more graspy see the food as the answer and develop all kinds of eating rituals. I'm a great ritualistic eater.
mm,
We have places we like to do our eating, and it really is a way of attaining mindlessness rather than mindfulness.
mm.
So when we see food more as fuel, and when we acknowledge that we are, that God don't make no junk, and that we are all Buddhas except for some obstacles and obscurations, then we develop a different relationship to the food. And I know if I'm in a lot of certain kinds of stress,
Mhm.
I'll turn to food at times, and I'll be eating it, and I'll think, okay, well, I'm attached right now. I'm in stress. This is really fun. Um, I know there's karma attached to overeating, which is weight.
Mhm.
That's simple cause and effect. And then
Right.
looking at it that way without guilt is like makes it so much easier to get back on track with our eating.
Right.
Um, and it isn't true that all Buddhists are vegetarian by any means.
No. No.
But they are very much. They talk a lot about the one taste. That's it's our task when we eat as meditation to have everything be one taste. So what we're trying to do is come to a state of neutrality with food.
I'm not
That it
exactly sure what that means. I haven't heard that before. So you're not allowed to enjoy food? I mean, neutrality to me implies you can't get pleasure from eating.
well we do because we're human and we are not realized Buddhists. So
Okay. Are you
all of
saying we
us
shouldn't or?
no. I'm saying we just need an awareness that if we have a preference, and I'm looking at this piece of what looks like really rich chocolate cake,
Mm.
if we have a preference for that, we're going to be
Oh, I see.
susceptible to
Mm.
attachment to it. And
Ah.
so there is, in every practice we do, there's always a food part of the practice, and the plates are heaped up with all kinds of rich foods and vegetables and fruits. And as we're eating,
Mhm.
um, we are really meditating on this is all one taste in
Mm.
reality.
I
But
see.
our
Yeah.
egos say it isn't. So
Ah.
then we have a relationship to, and we can say, oh, it's my ego. This is
Mm.
like not how it really is. Again, a form
Mhm.
of delusion.
So it's really in your mind.
Everything is
Uh,
in your mind.
when you said when we do the practice, do you mean in your coaching? Are you referring to recovery
No,
coaching, or now are you referring to being a Buddhist?
I'm referring to being a Buddhist and
Okay,
we do what's called a Red Tara practice.
right. How does
And
this apply to recovery coaching then? Like for me, the non-Buddhist, let's say.
the Buddhist practice does not at all have anything to do with the recovery coaching.
Okay.
It's just what I do as a Buddhist. I
Okay.
keep that separate. But our relationship to food
Mm-hmm.
those principles all still apply, or substance, or relationships.
So can you clarify that a little for me? The principle, which principle are you talking about now?
That the one taste, and
Okay.
that
Okay.
the two primary causes of suffering are attachment and aversion. And
Mm.
I'll talk about relationship a little bit. We get into relationship thinking somehow it's going to fix us. Well, the Buddhists know that a relationship is to teach us certain skills of kindness and compassion and wisdom. And those skills come about, the curriculum is our partner bugs the crap out of us, excuse my language, and we think that they are the cause of all of our suffering. And we come to understand that that is our delusion, and that whoever we're with is there karmically to teach us what it is we need to learn, and they are no better or worse than us. We are really on an equal par. And it's the same with food. It's that sense of understanding the relationship of the power of the other, which is a delusion, because there is no other.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Uh, yeah, I don't want to get too terribly esoteric, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I do. And in my Buddhist practice, there are a couple of principles I really like that sort of come to mind here, and that is going back to your idea of a curriculum, and that's that your enemy is your biggest or your best teacher.
Yes.
And in relationships, when we talk about anger, I wonder if this resonates with you. I loved the image of the fact that you wouldn't be responding. It's like a glass of water with some sand at the bottom, and then the relationship. You feel that your
Stirs it
partner
up.
is making you angry, so you're stirred up, literally and metaphorically.
Hmm.
But if that sand wasn't in that glass of water, then it would stay clear, right? Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like it would stay pure.
Yes. Right. But the sand is in the glass of water.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we work with. So our job is to keep things as still as possible in an authentic way, not in a
Repressive way.
exactly. Thank you.
You're
Perfect
welcome.
word.
Yeah.
Perfect word.
Words of my
Right.
thing.
Yeah, and so like with my husband, I'm doing a kindness project, and that is to be kind as I can possibly be, even when he's bugging me to death, which he does, because
Mm-hmm.
he's my husband. That's what we do.
Okay.
It's like relationship is a pressure cooker.
Hmm.
And again, it's all curriculum. What am I supposed to learn from this? And so, since I have all these expectations on him, because he is called my husband, I expect him to behave in certain ways. Um, and then I get to blame him when he doesn't. That's all delusional.
Mm-hmm.
This is all about me,
Okay, so then
ultimately.
then maybe to bring it right back down to earth in our description of the webinar tonight, we talked about codependency in relationships, and maybe
Hmm.
you could tell me how mindfulness recovery coaching, what would be the take on that in addressing a codependent relationship, someone who
Sure.
feels they're codependent, like a specific
Okay.
example, and maybe
So
something you can use to take home tonight to work with.
So first I have to define what codependency is, because I
Mm-hmm.
think there's some confusion about that.
Okay.
Codependency is nothing other than a poor relationship with self. And so since we have a poor relationship with ourself, we tend to pick others that we can either fix or be a victim of. And that is what codependency is. That is not a bodhisattva. That is an imbalanced kind of a relationship.
Maybe we
So,
should define bodhisattva then for those who don't know what that is.
Sure. The Bodhisattva vow is basically says, help me to become enlightened so I can help all beings become enlightened. So we become dedicated to the enlightenment of all beings with the caveat of help me to become enlightened first. We
Mm-hmm.
cannot do it without our own enlightenment. And to me,
Sure.
that is a cure for codependency. And I always
Mm.
like to use my favorite codependency joke, which is
Okay.
two codependents have sex, and one says to the other, well, it was good for you. How was it for me?
Okay.
And that puts it in a nutshell. I mean, that really explains it. And so when we're working on our codependency, what we're really doing is developing a healthier relationship to ourselves, understanding who we are. We oftentimes we don't know. We're human doings instead of human beings. And that's where I love the inventory, the 12-step inventory, because that, and as a recovery coach, I will take people through those steps who don't particularly fit in a 12-step program or don't like the 12-step programs for whatever reason, because I acknowledge, even though I love them, it's not for everybody. But that four-step inventory really helps us learn who we are, what our character defects are. So my husband can say to me things like, you are really fussy and kind of picky. And I'm like, oh, I know. That's one of my character defects. I'm a little OCD and I like things to be just so. And so he can say that to me and I don't get defensive at all. He's right.
Mhm.
I know that about myself.
So you just own it.
You own it. And
Yeah.
then you're less reactive.
Yes,
And
absolutely. So,
that causes peace.
sorry?
That causes peace.
Ah,
When
peace is good.
peace is good.
Well, here's one for you then.
Uh-huh.
Speaking about codependency, how about if we spoke earlier about interdependence? So maybe you
Yes.
can clarify then, or just underscore how interdependence is different than codependent.
Yes. Interdependence in relationship implies two healthy people relating to each other. Codependence is two unhealthy people bouncing off of each other. Interdependence is, all it's saying is that everything is in relation to something else. Everything that we can think of, not just other people, but everything is a relationship between this and something else. That's how reality shows itself. It's relational. Does this make sense?
Well, what's coming to mind, Michelle, for me when I'm hearing this, I guess I was looking at that root or that word inherent in both terms of dependence or dependency. And when we talk about interdependence, what occurs to me is the dependence part. In interdependence, if we're talking about a healthy relationship, it's more a dependency in the sense of a biological or that we it was a really brilliant thought at the time. Is that we really do coexist because we're meant to live together
It's
at the same time,
yes,
but not in an unhealthy way, in a healthy way. So
that's
it's,
right. That's
we're
right.
healthy and whole individuals, but we need each other in a healthy way. That's just who we are. Is that kind of, that's a little airy fairy,
Sure,
but
that well, it's okay. That our relationship makes us stronger as because there are two of us or more, a whole family, that it increases the dynamic and the strength of, and it gives us boundless opportunities to express love and compassion and become more wise too.
hmm
Because wisdom and compassion are the ultimate goal. Wisdom
hmm
and compassion. It's
hmm
all very simple.
hmm and
It's just
maybe
difficult.
Yeah, and maybe even on a more basic level, and maybe this isn't really relevant, but I love the idea that none of us are great at everything. And when I think of interdependence, I think of how much I truly value and appreciate our individuality, and that together, we can build a
Mhm.
beautiful house, or we can accomplish incredible things because we're interdependent in the sense of we're a team and we're creating this
Team.
life, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Whereas
Yes.
dependency implies, like in codependency, it kind of implies to me you feel that you're lacking in something in and of yourself. And so you look to get
Right.
that from the other person to fill some hole. I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Well, and you can see the couple here that are screaming at each other. They've got their heads together and they're sort of like leaning against each other and touching.
Mm-hmm.
A healthy relationship, and I think Khalil Gibran talked about this, so that, we're two pillars standing
Right.
alone, helping to hold up whatever we're holding.
Mm-hmm.
If we're leaning against each other, we become weaker.
Mm-hmm.
And so helping people with codependency is really nothing other than what I do with all types of attachments, which is know thyself. Get to know who you are, um, release your aversion to yourself, accept yourself lovingly as an imperfect expression of the Buddha, and then again, then we're able to be more gentle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. And then we have a third piece here. Oh my gosh, it's 7:47. I'm
Oh, you're
having
having
so
fun.
much fun with you. Should we say something about substance before we go on to probably one of my favorite topics, which is the next one?
I
So,
think we've covered substance. If anybody has questions about that, they certainly can type that
mhm.
in.
And I do want
Um,
to say to the audience or the attendees, if you do have a question, I haven't really. Yeah, I hope the questions are working okay. I think they are, but we'll move along to then something you and I spoke about when we were setting this webinar up, Michelle. We were talking about the difference between possibility thinking and positivity, or positive versus negative thinking. And you and I
yes.
both actually make quite a distinction. So I guess the question I want to put to you is, can you talk about, why you choose to focus on possibility thinking versus, positive thinking or negative thinking? Maybe you could
Yes,
describe the difference.
this is a very charged subject for me. I am very anti-positive thinking.
You
um,
better explain that quick.
yes, I know. Um, Positive and negative thinking, the way I look at that is that they are both delusional and they take a heck of a lot of energy. That what you're doing is in possibility thinking, you're trying to get yourself into a neutral place. Again, that word neutrality.
Hmm.
A lot of people will say, "Well, just think positive, and it will make everything better." And that may or may not be the case, depending on karma. Um, it's good to, when we're in possibility thinking, we are open and receptive and grateful and happy. So it isn't that we're not being positive, but when you're in that positive versus negative place, you're pushing the river either way. When you're in possibility thinking, you're allowing the river to flow right over you,
Can you
and
explain that a little bit? What do you mean? Like, let's take positive thinking. How is that pushing the river? If I'm just playing devil's advocate, but I think I'd like to clarify it
sure.
for myself and
Okay.
others. So I'm into positive thinking. How is that pushing the river?
Okay, well, like an example of a positive thinking, and I have the secret down here. What is trying to think of the phrase they use, the law of attraction.
Oh yeah.
Um, and they say, and this is sort of like the Christian hit on karma, that whatever, that if you put negative stuff out, negative is going to come to you. So if you just think positive and then you're going to be able to amass all this wealth and this fancy car and this nice house, and that's what we call spiritual materialism. When we're open with possibility thinking, we may or may not have a big, beautiful house and car, but we're not going to be attached to it either way. If you're like pushing on making your life a certain way through positive thinking, and I've had clients who've read The Secret and tried it and came back to me and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so disappointed, exhausted." Because stuff happens. Does this make sense? I can tell by your giggles.
Yeah, no, I love that. This is why I love this topic, and I quite agree. I think of the positive thinking as sort of magical thinking.
It's very magical. It's like having acne scars and saying, "I have no acne, my skin is beautiful and clear." And it's like, come on, get over it. You have acne scars. What are you supposed to learn from that?
And it's also like setting yourself up for failure, setting yourself up for disappointment, whereas with the possibility thinking, and I think you were alluding to this just a little bit earlier, I like to think of the term unshakable happiness, so that no matter what storms are, buffeting you about, if you have possibility thinking, you have what I call unshakable happiness, and that's a Buddhist term as well in my practice anyway. And I really like that. It's like you really, no matter what happens, there's an inner core that's really strong. Do you know what I mean?
And all the stuff that does happen to us, if we look at it as our curriculum, of course it's all good. Because it's all there to teach us. That is the unshakable happiness, is that all the suffering that comes to us, and we don't shun suffering because that only makes it worse, it is there to help us. So that's good. That is ultimately a place of gratitude and happiness, rather than, positive negative is a valence. That implies pushing, a force. Possibility is no force, it's just allowing. And so much about recovery is just allowing things to be as they are, allowing them to come in and to pass.
And this reminds me too of our earlier in our conversation when we were talking, or at least I was mentioning that awful feeling of being stuck. If you're into possibility thinking, it's more mindful in the sense that it has the word possible in it, right? Like when you were saying, when you coach people, you hold the possibility that yes, they will recover,
Yes.
So anything's possible.
Anything is possible, right? So it's just, I just think of it as letting the river flow rather than pushing the river.
And yes, and in terms of mindfulness, then I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that we're pointing to the fact that possibility thinking is more in alignment with moving through your life in a mindful way, sort of embracing it all, whereas with that positive or negative thinking, it's like you have blinders on and you're not mindful of all the other parameters around you, so you've limited your vision. Is that
and in positive negative thinking, everything is either good or bad, good or bad, good or bad.
Exactly. It's those
are delusional concepts.
They're very Western concepts, aren't they? I think a lot of us tend to, in our sociocultural milieu or paradigm in our societies, really, I think black and white thinking is very prevalent, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Well, it's a way of avoiding reality, and that's aversion. And aversion is a primary cause of unhappiness, suffering.
Everything is connected.
Yep. And you see how simple this technology is. There's just maybe 6 or 7 different concepts that you can continually come back to
Hmm.
every time, every time.
I love that. So if I were your client and you were coaching me and incorporating me these principles, would you, let's say I'm not a Buddhist and these are all new sort of ideas to me, is this the kind of thing that you incorporate in your actual practice? You would be in your coaching, you would be sort of reminding me of how I could look at my situation
Sure.
with these concepts?
I literally teach the 4 thoughts that turn the mind, and then once they hear those, when stuff comes up, I refer them back to, okay, well, you're having suffering now. So just let it be, understanding impermanence, that this will pass. And it's a constant reminder which causes transformation and ends up with a sense of calm and happiness.
Hmm. And do these principles help people through that, oh, good one, help them
Okay.
through that tendency that we do have? I think a lot of us, if not most of us, have to beat ourselves up when we, I don't know, see ourselves failing or taking a step backward or
Yes.
so.
Beating ourselves up is just such a sad thing, isn't it? I mean,
Mm,
it is that should cause sorrow in whenever I see anyone beating themselves up. Well, I usually say, keep that up, and I'm calling Child Protective Services because they're
mhm,
usually beating up their inner child,
mhm.
and it just makes me so sad to see that because it only adds to the problem. It in no way helps.
Well,
It's
sure. I mean, if you need strength, uh, and I would think you would, if you need strength to go through this journey to recovery, how are you supposed to become stronger when you're pummeling yourself,
Yes, yeah,
right?
it's a form of violence. It's
Yeah.
and we look at in Buddhism we call these poisons, and
Mm,
if we are participating in like jealousy and rage and violence and anger, those are all poisons, and they not only do they poison others, they poison us as we experience them. This is why I'm doing the kindness project, and I am so much happier being
mhm,
kind to my husband than being bitchy,
mhm,
because that's poison. Since we're interdependent, that's
mhm.
poison that comes right to me.
Right, right. Oh man, I wish we had another hour.
Well, we'll
I
have to get together again sometime. I'd love to talk about the shadow story. The
oh,
stories
now there's a
we.
cliffhanger. Thanks. I'm just gonna flow with that. All
Well,
right.
you hear Buddhists talk a lot about the stories that we tell ourselves, and that's all delusional thinking. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes. All right. Well, I'm just going to grab hold of the final screen here. Everybody, I hope, has jotted down Michelle's website address. And if you miss any of these links, do remember that there is a replay. So you can go back and snag that. And you can also, of course, look at our YouTube channel. So holy moly, that's an hour. I cannot
Yeah,
believe that.
that went
Um,
by fast. I really enjoyed your questions and the interplay. It was tons of fun.
oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's like I said, I could definitely keep
Yes, great at
going with
this.
this. There's just so much to explore, and I think overall I'm left with a real feeling of hope and possibility, and I don't know, I feel positive. I'll try to
Great,
all about
yeah,
it, but anyway, before we wrap up, Michelle, hang in there for a moment. I'd like to
sure.
remind everyone that, of course, again, the replay of tonight's webinar will be posted at Psych Central's YouTube channel later this week. And I would really, really like to extend a warm thank you to everyone who attended live tonight. And I'd also like to give a shout out to those of you who are listening to the replay, but couldn't make it live. I'd like to thank Psych Central, of course, for hosting, and I left the best for last. I would like to thank our special guest, Michele Happe. It's been just a wonderful journey with you. Thank you so much.
It's been my great pleasure.
Okay, well, good night, everyone, and we'll see you again.